Okay, so I promise this is the last video about Top Hat. And just real quick, if you actually look at the folders or files for the numbered chapters, you can get an idea of some of the readings. And just a quick disclaimer here. The first set of readings, Native American mythology, they're myths. And I define in the chapter a little bit about what myths are, what they represent, so forth. But upon reading them, you will quickly see that they're obviously not true per se, but that they contain important messages, lessons, reveal a lot about, let's say, the characteristics, habits, and beliefs of indigenous people, and so forth. They are strange, or some of them, even a little grotesque. And again, you'll quickly figure out what I mean. But bear with them. Again, if you need help, you have the, under getting started, yes, the class reading motifs. So if you're like, again, I don't know where to begin with this. This is about, this is so strange. How am I supposed to have any sort of meaning or interpretation? Look right here. And this is true for all of the works, but especially will be true, not the grotesque part, but just if you get stuck, just don't forget that you have this resource right here to help you. The Puritanism and Cotton Mather, again, we'll read two works by Cotton Mather, and I find them interesting for the rhetorical, from the rhetorical standpoint of kind of argument and rhetorical strategies, play on words, word manipulation, and so forth. But they're not what you would call pleasure reads. You're not going to go sit on a beach somewhere and pick a book or a quote, short work by Cotton Mather. Chapter 3, again, not super fun for beach reads, but very important. And this is where we look at some of the documents written by the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists and some of the Founding Fathers. And so they're, extremely relevant, extremely important, because most people like to cite the beliefs of the Founding Fathers and these famous historical dead now white men, but they've never even read what they actually wrote. And so I think you'll find it interesting. Again, we'll read, for example, one of the readings is Common Sense by Thomas Paine. And just like the Cotton Mather work, you can think of it from a rhetorical word argument perspective, and not just because there is no plot, there are no characters or anything, because they're documents. Anyway, and then chapters 4 through 9 is where we get into actual stories. Here are some PowerPoints that apply to the chapter 4 through 7 readings about Romanticism, Gothic literature, dark Romanticism, similar or also known as, depending on who you ask, Gothic literature. And we'll read, for example, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, as I mentioned, I think in the second video, or maybe it was the first, some works by short stories by Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author of the novel, The Scarlet Letter. And we'll read some more works by Hawthorne. And when we get into Edgar Allan Poe and some of his dark short stories, Moby Dick. And this is kind of funny because Moby Dick can be one of the most boring, drawn out books to read in the entire free world. But I have selected the interesting chapters about the whale, about Moby Dick, Captain Ahab, and the other supporting characters, where they're, engaged in, quote, the hunt, engaged in the conflict, and so forth. Because the chapters in between all of these chapters that have been selected for you to read are about whaling and the land and live life on the sea and so forth. And not that they're not well written, they're just not super interesting, unless you're into that sort of topic. And then slavery, transcendentalism, we will read, let me scroll down any further. And I know it's kind of cut off here because of the mark or toolbar thing. But Uncle Tom's Cabin. And I know most people, or most of you will have heard of the expression Uncle Tom. Well, that's where the expression comes from, even though it's actually totally different in use today than what is characterized in the novel. And it is a novel. It was written by a white woman, Harriet Beecher Stowe. But chapter 9, Frederick, well, again, it's cutting off, but Frederick Douglass, you'll read 2 of his works and his autobiography. He was an escaped slave who taught himself how to read and write and was very influential in his time period and has remained a very noteworthy writer and humanitarian. So let me just show you what a typical chapter looks like. And I'm going to pick, we'll do one on, let's see, we'll do Hawthorne and Pope. So again, these are just the page. There's no other documents. But if you click on the down arrow, obviously next to the folder, you can see the chapter 5, just like chapter 4. This is the content. And there's an extra reading for this chapter and for all the ones that have folders related to the actual stories or documents, texts themselves. And this extra reading relates specifically, as you can see there, reading for discussion. So let me just click on and show you what a typical page looks like. And let me hide this, so I forget to do that. So you'll see the title, chapter. You have some internal bookmarks, links here to the page, so you can jump down. There's usually always a beginning picture at the top. And then the chapter learning outcomes. These are extremely important. That's why this class isn't as easy as it seems. Oh, I'll just read a couple of boring stuff, throw out a couple of papers, discussion boards and assignments, and, I'll make an A. No, like I said, you have to keep in mind the critical approach or approaches that I have listed, as well as the specific chapter learning outcomes. I will also look for each of these, in this case, 3 points in your discussion post and in your critical questions assignment. And so please carefully read these. This is what is expected of you. And you'll see there's always an introduction, gives you a little background, historical context, sometimes information about the author, and you can just go through there, some ideas, questions, quote things or points to keep in mind as you read. And then here are the links to the required readings. These are all on the internet. If the link happens to be broken, I've checked them all, and they, as of now, Sunday, they all work. But sometimes sites go down, link URLs change, etc. You can just Google The Birthmark by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and it would pull up the short story. None of these are copyrighted because it's been so long since they were first published. The Cask of Amontillado, again, it's Amontillado net, not Amontillado or something. It's Amontillado. It's a Spanish wine, so to speak. And then The Telltale Heart. Many of you might also be familiar with this. And then I always have videos about, again, the historical context, some of the characters, some of the stories. This is Edgar Allan Poe. And this is another, by the way, I know I'm speaking quickly here because I'm trying not to waste too much of your time. But another great resource is Shmoop. You can see the spelling. I know it's hard to read, but it's Shmoop. This is basically the Purdue OWL that I mentioned or referenced in the second video. sort of the website that's considered sort of the Bible for writing and English and grammar and so forth. This is the equivalent of that, but for videos on YouTube. And so they have tons of videos about, like I said, grammar, about specific stories, about writing thesis statements, about authors and authors' lives, so forth. For all different types of writing assignments, writing, anything related to writing, like I said, a scientific report or whatever. You can find it if you just go to YouTube and search for Schmoop. It'll pull up, hundreds of videos. Then finally, the last two sort of headers in each chapter, on each chapter page, will be the discussion questions. Sometimes, for example, for chapter 1, there's only one discussion question. Sometimes there's more than one. And you'll see here that I have identified the critical approach, psychological. Questions here are prompts 3 and 4. They're about this additional, maybe go down here, this additional reading. So there's not a critical approach. It's the essay itself is a critical approach, this reading for discussion. And Barbara is the name of the author of the extra reading. And then reader response, determine whether the narrator of the telltale heart is reliable or unreliable, so forth. And in Canvas, I have the specifics I have the specifics about how long your discussion posts need to be. And that's per question or per prompt. So not all 5 in total, but for each one. And then the critical question, and at least 1.5 pages per question. I'm very particular about page length. That said, I don't want a bunch of BS. So you need to think hard and put your thinking caps on. And that's double space, though, by the way. Regular formatting, Times New Roman size 12 font. Do not double space between paragraphs or quadruple space, whatever, between paragraphs. And you must include specific references or examples or passages, quotations from the text. As I mentioned earlier, you need textual support. And when I say mention earlier, I think I mean video 1. You will type these up in one document, one file in Word or whatever word processing program you use. You will submit in Canvas. Remember, all the discussion, all the questions will go in Canvas. The actual content, what to answer, what to write about is here in Top Hat. What to read is here in Top Hat. And that's your typical chapter. They pretty much follow exactly the same format. Just to show you real quick, I'll click on, if it'll let me, it may not let me, let's click on Stowe here. In Uncle Tom's Cabinet, unfortunately will not let me format the title. This is a novel, so it should be italicized or underlined. They won't let me do that in the heading here. And I did forget to mention this. And the only reason why it's not in chapter 4 is because, or 5, whatever the chapter I just went over, chapter 6, I'm sorry. Because this timeline that you're seeing right here is in chapter 4 at the beginning. But you'll see every sort of section or literary period page has this timeline on it. In American literature, timeline, major literary periods. This is a quick video, kind of introduction to American literature, part 1. And then you'll see Native American storytelling. This corresponds to chapter 1. And you can go through the rest of this. Puritanism, colonialism, chapter 2. And then we get to chapter 3, to the government documents, the age of reason, common sense. Thomas Paine argues for in his work, Common Sense. And then we get to Romanticism and American Gothic. which again cover chapters 4 through really 8, but through Stowe. But she was also a transcendentalist and abolitionist, the poetry and slave narratives, chapters 8 and 9. And just one more disclaimer, and I'm going to shut up and let you be on your way now, is that these are approximate time periods listed above each sort of movement. And you'll see that Romanticism overlaps with Transcendentalism. And if you look up, different sites, or, Wikipedia might have one thing, and the American Literary Society page might have, dates that are a couple years in difference. But give or take, these are the approximate dates of the literary movement. And of course, we can look at that now and say, okay, yes, this is where the writing started to shift from these type of themes, topics, this particular style into this. But of course, they did not know, I'm going to write a romantic short story. And romantic, in the sense of Romanticism, is not lovey-dovey. It's not at all. It's completely different. So don't think that these are all going to be love stories, because none of them are. Maybe except The Fall of the House of Usher. And that is it. So I'm going to keep my word and let you go, and hope that you enjoy the semester and you can easily get set up in Top Hat, and contact me anytime. Talk to you later.